Welcome to another episode of Progress, Potential, and Possibilities, discussions with fascinating people designing a better tomorrow for all of us. I'm your host, Ira Pastor.
Everybody again to another episode of our show. Today bringing you another really fascinating guest involved in creating a better tomorrow for so many people out there. Today we have the honor of being joined by Ilana Golant, who is both the founder and chief executive officer of the Food Allergy Fund, which is a leading nonprofit that is dedicated to funding food allergy research, ultimately with a focus of identifying underlying causes, discovering new therapeutics, and ultimately improving the lives of all people living with food allergies. And ultimately through their groundbreaking research and really unique thought leader summits, accelerating innovation in this really unique area. Ms. Golant is a marketing and public relations executive. She's also an attorney, as well as a former government official, as well as a mother of a child that has food allergies. So brings a very interesting personal story to this as well. Ms. Golant has extensive experience working with media organizations, academic research institutions, Fortune 100 clients. She's held executive roles at organizations like WPP, the world's largest advertising and PR conglomerate, as well as at groups like NBCUniversal, specifically working with CNBC, MSNBC, and NBC News. Prior to joining that organization, Ms. Golant was an attorney advisor in the Office of Financial Stability at the United States Department of Treasury. She was an attorney at Mayer Brown LLP, has her bachelor's from Columbia and her JD at New York University School of Law. A lot of really interesting topics to get into today. Ilana Golant, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's great having you. I would love to start off, as we typically do, by handing things over to you for a little bit, just to tell a little bit more about your story, not just your background and this amazing journey you've been on, but sort of the personal side of this and what got you first focused on this food allergy issue, and then realizing it was something you wanted to dedicate a big piece of your time to.
In essence, my daughter was 13 months old when she had an anaphylactic reaction one fine Sunday afternoon to a food that she had previously eaten. And I had no idea what an allergic reaction looked like. I thought it was impossible that she was in anaphylaxis because she had eaten the food many times previously. And while I was Googling and figuring it out, obviously ultimately sought emergency medical care for her. And that was my introduction to food allergies and, a rude awakening, because I really did not understand the life-changing impact of it. It is an invisible disease in many ways. It is an autoimmune disease, and it is life-threatening. And it is quickly becoming the fastest growing childhood disease in America. 1 in 13 kids now have food allergies, and 1 in 10 adults. So it's affecting kids and adults in increasingly alarming rates. And so that was my introduction. When my daughter was first diagnosed, we were living in New York. We then moved to DC, and she tacked on allergy after allergy after allergy, kind of around 18 months. And we were seeing top doctor in New York, top doctor in DC, and they were disagreeing on her standard of care. And I thought, well, how could that be that I, as a mom, have to figure this out? It kind of reminded me of one of my favorite childhood book series, Choose Your Own Adventure. It felt like I was choosing my own food allergy adventure. And so what I quickly realized is that, short of going to medical school myself, I needed to figure out what is causing food allergies. And there is no known cause. as the numbers have skyrocketed over the past 15 to 20 years, there's been an increasing amount of research and evolving understanding, but there still is no known cause or series of causes. And so that was really the genesis of the organization. I wanted to figure out how I could accelerate an understanding of the underlying cause so that we could get therapeutics and, in an ideal world, find a cure, but at the very least, find therapeutics that are more effective. And so the lawyer in me started looking at other disease-based organizations, Crohn's and colitis, cystic fibrosis, autism, juvenile diabetes, to understand how philanthropy and the nonprofit world can really accelerate innovation. And those organizations have done amazing work for those disease states. And so I really borrowed their playbook and applying it to the food allergy space.
It's interesting. Before we sort of get into the organization, you were just mentioning some of the sort of the staggering figures there, and for everybody listening and watching, we can go to the website and we'll post the link in the bio of the show. But some of these numbers in terms of $25 billion annually and this tremendous uptick in recent decades in these allergies, and it's interesting because I have 3 kids myself, and they'll have their friends over and parents will come over, and it seems like every other kid nowadays is carrying around an EpiPen with them. And I grew up in the late 60s, early 70s, and I'm talking to the parents. We're sitting around, we didn't have this back in the day. And I'm just interested, and we'll get into some of the sort of you have this amazing team that you've put together. What are some of the leading theories in terms of sort of what's happened? I mean, I've heard people talk, we've gotten, this sort of the whole hygiene issue, that we've gotten a little too sterile in our daily lives. I've heard people talk about, the food companies really, playing around with some of these exotic ingredients that become antigens. What are some of what you hear just when you're casually talking to some of the thought leaders in your circle about this topic?
Yeah, I mean, you hear a range of theories. The hygiene hypothesis was quite popular about a decade ago. It has more recently been debunked to a large extent. The microbiome, so one of our scientific advisory board members, Dr. Martin Blazer, has this amazing slide where he shows diseases in parallel going back to the 1970s, early 70s through the current years, where if you look at asthma, juvenile diabetes, autism, food allergy, all childhood diseases, they follow the same exact hockey stick over a course of 50 years. So there has to be some common denominator. And so one theory around the common denominator is that the microbiome has gone haywire somehow, right? And that it didn't start yesterday, and it probably didn't start 10 years ago, 30, 40 years ago, and has reached kind of this new crescendo in recent years. There's the C-section hypothesis that with the rise of C-section, that babies aren't getting certain bacteria that is otherwise present in the birth canal, food manufacturing processes. There's a range of theories, but no one really knows. There's some interesting research that's coming out around the central nervous system that is very different in approach, and kind of is there a brain-gut axis issue at play? But you mentioned not really knowing people with food allergies. I grew up in the early 80s, but same thing. I didn't have any friends with food allergies, and I remember hosting my daughter's second birthday party, and it was a mix of friends' children, not allergy friends, but college classmates and her preschool classmates and law school classmates and neighbors. It's just a random sampling. There were 16 kids and 9 of them had food allergies, which is staggering, right? I mean, it's even higher than what is considered to be the percentage. And adults, I mean, it's really accelerating in adults, especially in their 40s. Why? No one knows. Are there hormonal shifts that happen every 7 years, roughly? Allergies change a lot with puberty, with childbirth. So those are possible indications that there's a hormonal interplay as well. But no one knows. And that's why we're trying to figure it out.
Outstanding. Yeah. And so, so you set up the organization, and, we'll get into in a little bit some of the portfolio, but I'd love to hear a little bit about your experiences in organizing all this, because aside from bringing together sort of these thought leaders from Harvard and Columbia, MIT, Stanford. You've in essence set up what looks like a tiny, almost like a pharmaceutical company. I mean, you have clinicians, you have microbiologists and immunologists, chemical engineers, you got some psychologists. Obviously, you can't put this together in a couple of days. Talk about a little bit what that was all like and how you organized this from the ground up.
Yeah, so there were two things that I noticed about the research that had been funded and kind of taking place when my daughter was first diagnosed, and it was disproportionately going to peanuts and oral immunotherapy. And so there are two things that happen from there. One is I have yet to meet the peanut allergic child. And maybe 20 years ago, you met the peanut allergic child.
Yeah.
Half of kids are now allergic to 4 or more foods. So the list is much longer. Children are also now presenting not only with food allergy, but other food-related autoimmune conditions, EOE, FPIES, diseases that didn't even have a name 25 years ago. And so there's this whole class of diseases that are suddenly emerging. And if you go food by food from an FDA approval process, you'll be at it for 250, 300 years, right? Because the FDA process is slow. And if you approach it food by food, you'll be at it, let's say 10 years per food. And there's been documented reactions to 170 foods. So there's something known as kind of the top 9 allergens, which are required by the FDA to be labeled on food products, but not on cosmetics, not on a variety of other products, which we can talk about a little bit as well, because you're now seeing allergic reactions to non-food, which is really interesting, because shared protein structures like latex and kiwi are the same allergy.
Yeah.
Which I didn't know, but and now I know. And so there are these unusual protein pairings that are affecting things. There was an incident where someone went into anaphylaxis from driving a new car. It turns out that there are plastic parts in the car that are made from the shell casing of a shrimp. Biodegradable plastics are made from shrimp oftentimes. And this person didn't know that, he had a shellfish allergy. And so kind of the widespread effects. So, for me, it was really important to think about this comprehensively, not in terms of one food or even one discipline or approach. I mean, I wanted the clinician's perspective, right? Because they're on the front lines, they're seeing what's happening, but really approaching it from every angle. So I drew up my wish list of 15 doctors and scientists across disciplines, across institutions, and I started cold calling them and saying, here's my vision. Would you join me? And they all said yes. Because they, understand and desperately need funding for this space, and they're incredibly talented, passionate scientists, physician scientists who've spent their career on this. And it's, I think they're the unsung heroes, the underfunded heroes, and so my job is to give them the platform, the funding to really accelerate progress. And so that's kind of how I came up with my list. It was, here's my dream team, and I'm going to go for it. You mentioned we have a psychologist on our board. The psychosocial impact of food allergy is also critically important. Almost 40% of kids experience bullying because of their food allergies, the anxiety of going to a birthday party, to a sleepover. Until you live life with food allergies, and I can say this myself, I did not appreciate at all how it affects every decision in your daily life.
Let's now take that dream team and talk a little bit about what they're doing, because again, the portfolio is quite broad. And again, for everyone listening and watching, you can go to the website and look at some of these. You sort of have a couple different baskets here, and I'd really like you to take your time to sort of go through these, and dedicating as much time as you want to each, but basically a component that's looking at sort of novel assays for food allergies, another that's really focused on novel ways to block anaphylaxis, and then sort of I'll put basket 3, which is innovative antigen vaccine / microbiome related technologies. I might be putting these in the wrong baskets, but I sort of saw those 3. Walk us through a little bit of the strategy with each of these, because it's clearly quite comprehensive and interdisciplinary, let's say.
Yeah. So we actually fund research through two mechanisms. One is we have an open RFP process, which is truly open and open-ended by design. We want to surface the most creative, innovative, multidisciplinary ideas out there. And so we run an open RFP process and basically say, give us what you've got, your best and brightest new idea. And then we have our scientific advisory board score the proposals and settle on the winner of that particular RFP round. We have very strict recusal procedures because the field is quite small. We don't want to preclude institutions and colleagues from applying for funding. And so we ask our scientific board members to recuse when necessary. And so we run this RFP process, and many of our projects have come out of that. Similarly, we have teams coming to us directly and saying, we have this project, would you consider funding it? And I will say that has been kind of organic word of mouth growth. We are one of the key alternatives to the NIH, right? And so we think of ourselves as the seed funders, where we can seed a project. We have a higher risk tolerance, failure tolerance before a team of PIs goes to the NIH and applies for funding. We actually, one of our projects just got phase 2 approval, which is really exciting, and I can talk about that in a second. But we're increasingly getting requests from around the world. And so while we are US-based and have funded research in the US to date, we're increasingly seeing demand from institutions abroad, from Japan, from Austria, from Switzerland. I mean, Australia. Every week we get a new request, Israel. And so we're really trying to keep up with that demand. We are hosting a summit actually next week in New York that's bringing together leading biotech companies and scientists from around the world. And we're really excited to create that platform as well, which I can talk about in a little bit. So in terms of the projects that we've recently funded, it's a range. And so it's not as much by design that we're going to focus on these 3 areas. It's more kind of, let's see what bubbles to the surface. And one thing that's been really interesting from my perspective is, the proposals come in, and there's always, once the SAB members score them, there's an overwhelming winner. It's not that there's a first and second, and then there needs to be a tiebreaker. So there seems to be this kind of consensus among the scientific community of this project is going to move the needle the most, right? In this batch of applications. And so how 15 folks can converge from different disciplines, different institutions, so different perspectives on the same winner, so to speak, has been really interesting for me to see. And so some of our recent recipients are, as I mentioned, we're funding the world's first fecal matter transplant for food allergy out of Boston Children's Hospital. Fecal transplant was recently approved by the FDA for C. diff as an approved treatment, which is really helpful, kind of paves the way for FMT to be approved for other conditions. And so in this study, we are tracking adult patients with peanut allergy to start with, and we're seeing really promising results. And so the theory of the project is the gut went bad, right? It was either the adult was born with a gut that was missing certain bacteria, or something went wrong over the course of adolescence. And so there are different arms to the study, but it's third-party fecal transplant donors. We spend a lot of time talking about poop at the Food Allergy Fund, but it's third-party fecal transplant donors. And the idea is to reset the gut to a previous state so that it can then tolerate what it otherwise sees as a pathogen when the adult consumes peanuts. And so we're finishing up the adult arm of the study, moving into the pediatric arm, in the next 6 to 12 months or so. And it's showing really promising results. It is easy to administer, and it's really liquefied, sterilized fecal matter in pill form that can be swallowed. So in terms of ease of use relative to other potential therapies, it's quite easy and quite promising. And so we're seeing safety has been established. We're seeing efficacy anywhere between 65 to 70% of the trial participants by the 4-month mark. Their IgE levels are dropping precipitously. And so now it's really figuring out how can we get them to drop even more? How can we get from 75 to 85 to 90? But we're well on our way to doing that. Some of the tweaks that the team is deploying is, whether the transplant donor takes antibiotics leading up to the transplant. Does that change things? So we're looking at other ways to continue to tweak the transplant process and implementation to make it even more effective. But we're really excited in phase 2 approval. It's our first project that's received phase 2 approval. So Dr. Rashid and team at Boston Children's are leading that. Awesome. We have another project at CHOP, Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, a part of the Penn system, that started with EOE, which is eosinophilic esophagitis, is now being increasingly seen as a comorbidity in food allergic kids in particular. And so the team led by Dr. David Hill at CHOP came to us and said, I would like to work on a new diagnostics tool for EOE, which I think would have carryover implications for food allergy as well. It might be worth just pausing for a second to talk about diagnostics, because the diagnostics in food allergy are so flawed and unreliable that that's step one in any disease, right? It's kind of how do you get diagnosed? And so in food allergy, there's blood and skin testing that have a very high, both false positive and false negative rate. And so because of that, the gold standard for diagnostics is considered the oral food challenge, where the child or an adult goes to an allergist's office and consumes small doses of that food every 20 minutes over a period of 5 to 6 hours. It is anxiety inducing for the child, for the parents, because you're sitting there thinking, well, the next bite that I feed my child could cause my child to go into anaphylaxis. And so as a parent, it is very difficult to sit through a food challenge. I mean, I've done it many, many times. Every food allergy parent I know dreads it, kind of the days leading up to it, because you're sitting there thinking, oh my gosh, I'm going to cause my child to potentially go into anaphylaxis. But that's really the only diagnostic. And so when Dr. Hill came to us and said, well, I have this new novel blood diagnostic platform, which I think could work for EOE and food allergy, please, like we're desperate for better diagnostic tools. And so he's looking at novel assays, started with EOE that will have carryover implication to IgE-mediated food allergy. We have another project out of Northwestern led by Dr. Eisenbarth, which is looking at how do you kind of stop anaphylaxis in its tracks and redirect the food protein from crossing the gut barrier. Okay. So kind of think of it as redirecting traffic, right? If you eat the food, it's making its way through the gut. When it crosses the barrier, that's when anaphylaxis is triggered. Well, can you cause the food to kind of travel differently within the gut and approach the intestinal barrier in a different way? So that project is showing, really promising results. We're working on 2 projects out of the University of Chicago that happen to have some overlap in PIs, but one is the world's first prebiotic for food allergy, which, again, kind of the theories around the gut. But if you can develop personalized prebiotics, that could be really effective. We're also working on an inverse vaccine out of Chicago. The lab that's leading that is led by Dr. Jeff Hubble, who started with celiac, again, kind of a food-related condition, but not IgE-mediated. So he started working on a celiac vaccine, and now he's working on an inverse food allergy vaccine. And it's an inverse vaccine because in, a food allergic reaction, in a normal vaccine, you develop tolerance. And so when you see the pathogen, you develop antibodies. But what's happening in food allergies, you're actually in overdrive. You're constantly developing the antibodies and treating it as a pathogen. So it's to kind of retrain the immune system that when it sees this pathogen, not to form antibodies, but kind of do the reverse, or the inverse, I should say. So that's another project that we're funding out of Chicago, we have another mRNA-related vaccine project that we're starting to work on as well. So there's a lot in the pipeline. We're really excited. It's so varied in approach, and all of the projects that we're funding are really meant to be multi-allergen applications, because, like I said, ultimately everything has to go to the FDA for approval, and so because both the patient dynamic is such that patients are allergic to a long list of foods, it's not one food anymore. You really need therapeutics that can handle multi-allergen classifications.
Related to that, because especially you're just talking about the T cell assay with Dr. Hill here at CHOP, and sort of this theme that we've gotten into on previous shows of repurposing of something. I was just interested, and if this is confidential, we don't have to totally go over it, but the pharmaceutical companies of the world have, their cabinets and storage areas full of millions of compounds, whether it's from microbiology, immunology, whatever, that do X. And there's, there's been a lot of activity, especially in recent years with COVID and sort of the innate immune system becoming such an important topic on how we sort of control it. Any interesting sort of things you're seeing, whether it's through people pitching you or maybe at the conferences on pharma companies, biotech companies say, hey, we have these compounds that do other related cool things related to the innate immune system, this antibody, so forth and so on. Can we apply them to the food allergy space? And again, if there's confidential stuff, you don't have to get into it, but you piqued my interest when you were talking about some of this repurposing of assays and so forth.
Yeah, so I think repurposing is a huge untapped opportunity for food allergy. And there are some biologics, Dupixent, Xolair, that started as, eczema, atopic dermatitis drugs that are being repurposed with great success for IgE-mediated food allergy. Right. We are working on a study that's actually repurposing a cancer drug. So kind of totally different sphere, but obviously immunologic at its core. But I think it's a huge opportunity that has not been leveraged for the food allergy space sufficiently. So we are not seeing that yet kind of become an area of demand, but it's something that we are proactively pushing. I actually met with Dr. David Feigenbaum recently, who wrote this book called Chasing My Cure, and he really inspired me to kind of go on the repurposing hunt. I don't share his, I don't have his scientific expertise, but kind of his core thesis of the cure to anything is kind of sitting at CVS right now. Yeah, and it's a matter of figuring out how to get to that drug quickly. So it's something that we are increasingly taking on as an organization.
Awesome. David's awesome. And it's interesting how much rapamycin actually comes up in the repurposing story, and be interesting if, you found a use for it in what you're doing too. But no, that's really cool. So April 20th, New York City, the Food Allergy Fund Summit is coming up. Talk a little bit about this, what's going to be happening, where it's going to be, a little bit of the dynamics there, and who's going to be showing up from your portfolio, of course.
Yeah, so we're really excited for the summit. We launched these summits in 2019 when I first started the Food Allergy Fund. Kind of borrowing from my professional background, I wanted to create the Aspen Ideas Festival for food allergy, kind of create the thought leadership gathering that gets everyone in a room together, the doctors, scientists, investors, media, advocates, patients, and let's figure this out and kind of start that dialogue. And so we did the summits in person pre-COVID. We continue to do them virtually throughout COVID, and we're really excited to come back in person next week in New York City at the Paley Center for Media. And we've done kind of general thought leadership gatherings, and then some that are more thematically focused. And the thematic focus for this upcoming event is how to accelerate investment in food allergy. One of the things that has become kind of evident over the past 2 years of fundraising, frankly, in a COVID world where they're actually, the silver lining to COVID is that people really understand the importance of healthcare. They understand autoimmune conditions, or kind of have a better understanding than they did 2 years ago. and that money can solve problems and accelerate therapeutics. And so there are two things that we've seen unfold. One is an increasing interest in venture philanthropy from high capacity families who have family offices who really want to accelerate innovation, right? And they're not kind of hampered by large pharma companies that to date have not shown much interest in the food allergy space. And the second is how to get the biotech community and the pharma community more interested in food allergy. I mean, it is a huge addressable market. And so I met with one of the most well-known biotech investors in the country about a year ago, which kind of sparked this idea for the summit, which is he had no understanding of the market other than having middle school age kids and said, oh, my kids' friends have food allergies. They carry an EpiPen, end of story, right? And that is often the refrain I hear. Okay, well, there's an EpiPen. What more does there need to be? When in fact, food allergic patients, kids and adults alike, are desperate for solutions because you're always living one bite away from fear.
Right.
And so in any other circumstance, if you said to someone, the addressable market is at least 400 million people globally, and it's completely untapped and there is no therapeutic, people kind of jump up and down and say, please, how do I make money? And so our goal is to create that platform for people to do well and while doing good. And so our summit is going to bring together 16 leading early stage, ranging from Series A to pre-IPO companies from around the world. And we actually had to say no, turn companies away because there was such demand. The good news is that 4 years ago, I couldn't do this event. There wasn't enough corporate structure, corporate interest, kind of the professional CEO, the professionalization of the food allergy market. I'm really happy to see that there is much more progress than there was a few years ago. And so the summit is going to bring together 16 companies from around the world, leading scientists, kind of talking about big picture scene setting of how does food allergy fit into the broader microbiome, kind of autoimmune framework. And then we'll have a room full of investors, those who are personally affected, whether they're family offices or biotech investors who happen to have a personal connection to food allergy, and those who have no personal connection, where we really seek to raise awareness for them of the market opportunity. The other unique feature of food allergy, unlike any other disease, is the consumer multiplier effect. I joke that my 7-year-old is our chief household officer because what airline we fly, what food we buy, what restaurant we go to is entirely and exclusively dictated by my 7-year-old. And that is true for any food allergy family. And so kind of the multiplier effect is so unique, unlike other diseases, right? If you have, a child with diabetes or cancer, another disease, the whole family doesn't change its consumption and kind of its consumer preferences, but food allergy transforms everything. And so raising awareness of both the addressable market, kind of the multiplier effect, and there's money to be made, there's commercialization opportunities, is really important. And so that's our goal for the summit next week. And I'd love for your listeners to join us.
Awesome. Really awesome. And then, just related to that, aside from the family offices and the venture philanthropy, the impact investors, you also, not just those folks can get involved. You have this really interesting Visionaries Club. Talk a little bit about that, and then if you would, just because I thought it was a unique. You say on the site, 100% of all donations are going to research here. That's entirely volunteer staffed and so forth. Say a few words about that, especially for the smaller investors that want to contribute to this this important.
So we're entirely volunteer staffed. I mean, I have an army of amazing food allergy parents who lend their various professional skill sets, networks, et cetera. And so that the money that we raise goes directly to research. And I think that's really important whether a family is donating $5 or $500,000, that they know their money is going to research. It's not going to overhead. It's not going to, a variety of other things. The other benefit of being volunteer staff by design is that when we fund research, we can be really strict with institutions around overhead. And so we cap it at 10%. We often get it down to 5%, and in some situations, 0%. No overhead, which is highly unusual and, creates some friction with the research institutions. But for us, we want to create that friction. We want to raise kind of the bar for food allergy funding, for more resources to flow to the various research teams. And so, yes, we're volunteer staff, and I'm so grateful to all of my amazing volunteers for helping. The summit, everything we do is volunteer staffed. We do get some corporate funding for the summit, et cetera. So that covers our overhead, outside counsel, accounting, et cetera. But all the money that we raise from families goes directly to research, and that's really important to our mission and to our core. In terms of the Visionaries Club, it's something that we created during COVID as an opportunity to create virtual programming, connection, connectivity among the food allergy community nationally. The other thing, personally, having gone from New York to DC, when my daughter was younger, I saw a very steep drop-off in awareness, in resources, and access to medical care, et cetera. And that was going from New York to DC, let alone going from an urban setting to a suburban, let alone a rural setting. And so this is a global health problem. And we really wanted to create that community for folks to connect. And so COVID was the opportunity to do that. And so we have a leading scientist join us virtually, and it's kind of an ask me anything. Ask me anything about antibiotics and food allergy. Ask me anything about psychosocial impact and food allergy. And so we're really lucky to have a network of doctors, scientists who are so willing to donate their time and do these kinds of briefing events for us.
Very cool. One last thing, Ilana. I mean, the summit, as mentioned, is coming up next week, but it's still quite early in the year. Any other things happening that you want to mention as we move further into 2023? Because I also noticed that, you've also, along all this stuff that you've been doing, you've hosted these challenges. A couple of years ago, you partnered with J&J Labs to do one specifically, and then the quickfire structure that they have there. You have another microbiome challenge last year, and again, this speaks to that you have sort of this ecosystem that's beyond just the folks that you're internally funding. You have a lot of these other projects out there that touch on these topics. Anything else hot for 2023 that you can mention along those lines beyond the summit?
Yeah, I mean, we're hoping to do some more of these challenges. We did the prevention one, like you mentioned, microbiome, taking these thematic buckets to really surface ideas from around the world. We haven't yet identified the next challenge, although, I think diagnostics is top of that list. We still don't have diagnostics tool, but there are a variety of kind of spin-offs of the prevention and microbiome theme that we're toying around with as well. The summit is kind of a really important, we do it early in the year so that it kind of lays the groundwork for the rest of the year. Connections are forged, projects come out of that. And so a month from now, I mean, I'll give you a better sense of what comes out of the summit, but really that's part of the goal of the summit, is kind of start those conversations, spin up those projects. I was talking to a researcher last week, and she said to me, I made more connections at your 2019 event than I have in the past 4 years. And I said, well, how is that possible? I mean, it's a great compliment, but how is that possible? And she said, because you just kind of curate the room in such a way that the conversations happen organically, and then we really follow up those conversations, foster those relationships so that they can kind of be grown throughout the year following the summit. So, we'll have programming in the fall as well. We're working on a research roadmap project. We're also looking to update some of the population studies that have been done. The numbers that I mentioned earlier date back to 2018, 2016, 2018, some back to 2004, which is a long time in the food allergy world, because the numbers anecdotally just continue to go higher and higher. And so kind of the population sizing, the market sizing is due for a refresh. So that's something that we're eager to take on later this year as well.
Well, I'll be reading you on and continuing to follow everything you do, because it's just, it's so, I mean, the concentration of things that you're involved in is so impressive. And again, as you have clearly articulated, this is such an major unmet medical need that I'm just glad you're doing this, and you're building this amazing thought leadership behind you to get it done. So again, rooting you on. For everybody that's going to be listening to this particular episode of our show across the various podcast networks or watching on the YouTube channel, again, you've been listening to Ilana Golant, founder and chief executive officer of the Food Allergy Fund, doing really amazing things to improve the lives of all people living with food allergies. Ilana, I want to thank you again for taking the time out of your schedule to come talk to us and educate us on these themes for a little while. Obviously, thank you for everything you're doing there at the fund. And as we like to say on our show, thanks for helping to create a better tomorrow for all those people out there that require this. Really, really great story.
Thank you. Thank you for raising awareness. I really appreciate it.
It's great having you.